a military version of the Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation. It was designed to serve as an airborne early warning system to supplement the distant early warning line, using two large radomes, a vertical dome above and a horizontal one below the fuselage. EC-121s were also used for intelligence gathering. It was introduced in 1954 and retired from service in 1978, although a single specially modified U aircraft remained in service with the U.S. Navy until 1982. The U.S. Navy versions when initially procured were designated West Virginia 1, West Virginia 2, and West Virginia 3. Warning stars of the U.S. Air Force served during the Vietnam War as both electronic sensor monitors and as a forerunner to the Boeing E-3 Sentry AWACS. U.S. Air Force aircrews adopted the civil nickname Connie as reference, while naval aircrews used the term Willie Victor, based on a slang version of the NATO alphabet and the naval version of the aircraft's pre-1962 designation of West Virginia 1, West Virginia 2 or West Virginia 3. Development. Since 1943 the Lockheed Constellation had been in the USAAF service as the C-69. The use of the Constellation by the U.S. Navy for patrol and airborne early warning duties was first investigated in 1949, when the Navy acquired two Lockheed L-749 Constellations. First flown on 9 June 1949, the P-01W carried large, long-range radars in massive radomes above and below the fuselage. As the radomes produced considerable more side area, the fins of the P-01W had to be increased. After the P-01W, which was redesignated West Virginia 1 in 1952, had proved that it was possible to operate large radars on aircraft, the U.S. Navy ordered the West Virginia 2 based on the L-1049 Super Constellation. The West Virginia 1s were later transferred to the Federal Aviation Agency in 1958-1959. The West Virginia 2, EC-121D was initially fitted with a dorsal APS-45 height finder radar and a ventral APS-20 air search radar. These radars were later upgraded to APS-103 and APS-95 radars, although not simultaneously. The crew commonly numbered 18, 6 officers and 12 enlisted personnel. However, when North Korea shot down a Navy EC-121 in 1969, a crew of 31 was on board. Orders were placed totaling 142 P-02W constellations based on the Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, with deliveries beginning in 1953. The type was redesignated West Virginia 2 in 1954. The West Virginia 2 was familiarly known to its crews as Willie Victor. In 1962, with standardization of aircraft designations within the Department of Defense, the West Virginia 2 then became the EC-121K. A total of 13 of these were converted to WV-2Q electronic intelligence aircraft, and 9 were converted to West Virginia 3 weather reconnaissance aircraft. The EC-121K was also operated by Training Squadron 86 at NAS Glencoe, Georgia for training of student naval flight officers destined to fly both the EC-121 and the Grumman E-2 Hawkeye. When NAS Glencoe was closed and VT-86 transferred to NAS Pensacola, Florida in 1973, the squadron's last EC-121 was also flown to NAS Pensacola for transfer to the collection of the National Museum of Naval Aviation, where it remains. Today, a single aircraft became an NC-121K, an electronic warfare variant assigned to Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron 33 at NAS Key West, Florida. This aircraft was the last EC-121 in operational service, flying until 25 June 1982. The Air Force received 10 RC-121C and 74 EC-121D warning stars, also based on the L-1049, beginning with diversions from the Navy contracts in October 1953. The 10 RC-121Cs became trainers, designated TC-121C. Between 1966 and 1969, 30 retired Navy EC-121s were transferred to the USAF and converted in EC-121Rs as sensor monitoring aircraft. Of the 74 EC-121s, 42 were converted to the EC-121H upgrade beginning in 1962, and in 1969. 15 of the remaining EC-121Ds and 7 of the EC-121Hs were further upgraded into the final operational variant, the EC-121T, which served as an AWACS prototype in Southeast Asia in 1972. 5 EC-121Ds were modified to be broadcasting aircraft for psychological warfare operations, the predecessors of the EC-130 Commando Solo. Operational service. U.S. Navy West Virginia II served from 1956 to 1965 in 2 barrier forces, one off each coast of the North American continent. These barrier forces consisted of 5 surface picket stations, each manned by radar destroyer escorts, and an air wing of West Virginia IIs that patrolled the picket lines at 1,000 to 4,000 meters altitude in 6 to 20-hour missions. Their objective was to extend early warning coverage against surprise Soviet bomber and missile attack as an extension of the DEW line. The Atlantic Barrier consisted of 2 rotating squadron detachments, VW-13 and VW-15, home-based at NAS Patuxent River, MD, and 1 squadron, VW-11, permanently based at Naval Station Argentia, Newfoundland. The mission was to fly orbits to the Azores and back. There was an AEW training unit based at NAS Patuxent River, Maryland. Barlont began operations on 1 July 1956, and flew continuous coverage until early 1965. The barrier was shifted to cover the approaches between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom barrier in June 1961. Aircraft from Argentia were staged through NAS Keflavik, Iceland, to extend coverage times. The Pacific Barrier began operations with 1 squadron based at NAS Babbers Point, Hawaii, operating from a deployment base at Naval Station Midway. On 1 July 1958, its orbits overlapped the radar picket stations of the ships of Escort Squadron 7, from roughly Adak Island to Midway. Normally 4 or 5 West Virginia IIs were required at any single time to provide coverage over the entire line. Barrier force operations were discontinued by September 1965 and their EC-121K aircraft placed in storage. However, Navy EC-121 operations continued until 1975 in 4 other squadrons. VQ-1 and VQ-2 operated EC-121M intelligence gathering aircraft at NAF Atsugi, Japan, and Naval Station Rota, Spain, respectively. VW-4 operated Willie Victors between 1954 and 1975 as Hurricane Hunters, with its primary base at NAS Jacksonville, Florida, and a forward base at Naval Station Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico, while its Pacific counterpart, VW-1, flew out of Agana, Guam, tracking typhoons. The aircraft was also operated by Training Squadron 86 at NAS Glencoe, Georgia for training student naval flight officers, and by Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron 33 for the Fleet Electronic Warfare Systems Group at NAS Norfolk. Virginia and later at NAS Key West, Florida. At the time of its retirement on June 25, 1982, the AQ-33 aircraft was the last EC-121K operated by the Navy, U.S. Air Force. The United States Air Force between 1954 and 1978 operated EC-121s in 3 wings at maximum employment, and 3 independent squadrons as its operations wound down. Until the Vietnam War, the primary mission of EC-121s was to provide complementary early warning radar coverage to the Pacific and Atlantic barriers by flying orbits 300 miles offshore of the continental United States in what was termed contiguous barriers. Their coverage orbits overlapped those of land-based early warning radars. Initial deployment of EC-121Cs began with the 551st Airborne Early Warning and Control Wing, based at Otis Air Force Base, Massachusetts. Operational on 21 December 1954, the 551st AEWCW subsequently upgraded to EC-121D and later EC-121H warning stars. Its Pacific counterpart was the 552nd AEWCW, based at McClellan Air Force Base, California, which became operational on 1 July 1955. After the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the 552nd AEWCW also had administrative control of the 966th AEWCS, based at McCoy Air Force Base, Florida. The 966th had a dual mission, monitoring activity in Cuban airspace and flying gold digger missions. The third wing to operate EC-121s was the 553rd Reconnaissance Wing, a Vietnam War organization activated in October 1967 and based in Thailand until its inactivation in December 1970. In 1966, Lockheed modified 30X USN Super Constellations aircraft to EC-121R for the specialized reconnaissance mission flown by the 553rd. Aircraft were delivered to the wing during the course of 1967. The 553rd RW flew over land and off the coast of Vietnam, over Laos and Cambodia, monitoring and retransmitting low-power signals. Usually they orbited the Ho Chi Minh Trail in 8-hour shifts. As it was expensive to operate and it exposed a large crew to enemy fire, it was replaced in December 1970 by the much smaller QU-22 Pave Eagle sensor monitor. The 551st AEWCW inactivated in 1969, while the 552D was reduced by a squadron in 1971. On 1 July 1974, the Air Force redesignated the 552D Airborne Early Warning and Control Wing as the 552D Airborne Warning and Control Group when it was downsized to a single squadron. It was inactivated on 30 April 1976. As the USAF prepared to deploy the E-3 Sentry in the later 1970s, the Air Force phased out EC-121 operations by the end of 1975. All remaining EC-121s were transferred to the Air Force Reserve, which formed the 79th AEWCS at Homestead Air Force Base, Florida in early 1976. The active duty force continued to provide personnel to operate the EC-121s on a 24-hour basis, assigning Detachment 1, 20th Air Defense Squadron to Homestead AFB as associate active duty crews to fly the reserve-owned aircraft. Besides monitoring Cuban waters, these last warning stars also operated from NAS Keflavik, Iceland. Finally, EC-121 operations ended in September 1978. Detachment 1 was dissolved and 79th AEWCS was redesignated a fighter squadron on 1 October 1978. In 1967, 5 EC-121s became operational with the 193rd Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron of the Pennsylvania Air National Guard, responsible for PSYOPs missions under Project Coronet Solo. From July 1970 to January 1971, they rotated on 30 to 90-day temporary duty deployments to Karatar TAFB, Thailand, under the name Commando Buzz.